lab I like to do in my face-to-face class. And since you're taking this online, let me walk you through this lab. This lab offers an opportunity to see how you might use modulus and integer division again, and as well as doing some string concatenation. So here's the problem. The Acme Media Company holds public focus groups from time to time, and they limit the size of each group to a particular optimal number, most often 17 participants, but that could change. And thus will break up the total participants into multiple groups of that predetermined size, or one participant larger. So a group could have 18 participants. Their preference would be to have groups of 17 people, but would allow for groups to have 18. They would like to hire you to develop an application that will calculate the total number of groups and the number of each size, optimal size and optimal size plus 1, and the app should allow for adjustable group size. While they usually do 17 participants, sometimes they might choose to do optimal groups of 13 or 9 or 20, etc. For example, if the optimal group size of each group was 10 and 73 people participated, there would be 4 groups of 10 people and 3 groups of 3 participants. If 225 people participated and the optimal size was 17, how many groups would they have of 17 people and how many of 18 participants to accommodate the extra participants? And so we're going to design an app that would allow the user to enter the number of participants, the optimal group size, and then click a button of how many groups, and the result will be a display of a message box that says there will be 13 groups total, 9 groups of 17 participants, and 4 groups of 18 participants. So let's do a little demonstration here, a little animation. So I'm going to walk you through the algorithm that we want to use to solve this problem, and we're going to do it with a smaller number so we can get our head around this a little bit easier. So let's say we have 18 people show up for a workshop, and we want to put them into groups of 4 or 5 people. So how many groups would I need? And how many groups would have 4 people, and how many groups would have 5? And see if you can figure that out in your head a little bit, and I'm going to show you the answer. So we're going to ask our participants to move into groups of 4. And we end up with 4 groups, but there are 2 people left over. So we'll put those 2 people each in a group. And so the answer is we have 4 groups, 2 of 5 and 2 of 4. Now, if you did this in your head and you were thinking about how this would work, you probably took the number 18, the total number of participants, and divided that by the number of participants per group. So you divided that by 4, and you came up with 4. And 4 times 4 is 16. You had 2 people left over. You assign each one of those leftover individuals to another group, and you'd end up with 2 groups of 4 and 2 groups of 5. So we're going to use that information and that methodology that we just did to create an algorithm in Visual Studio in C#. We're going to take the number of participants. We're going to do an integer division by the optimal number of people in a group. That will give us the number of groups. And then we simply take how many people are left over. That's the modulus, the remainder. And that's how many groups we'd have of that number. The number of groups we have the optimal would be the total number of groups minus that number with the extra people in it. So let's go to Visual Studio and create this. I'm going to create a new Windows Form project. I'm going to name this 02 how many groups. Choose where I want to save it. Click Create. And here then is our project. I'm going to narrow this up a little bit. Don't need a window quite that big. Okay, and I'm going to pull my properties over here so you can see this a little bit better. Let's change the text of the form to how many groups. And I'm going to create a label. The text of the label is going to be total participants. I'm going to create a text box to the right of that. I'm going to start with our default value that we just showed in the animation of 18. I'm going to align this to the right. I'm going to name this txt participants. I'm going to select the label and the text box. Paste. We'll select the label. Again, I'm not going to bother to name that label because I'm not going to use it in code, but I do want to change the text property. And the text property in this case will be optimal group size. I'm going to add another label just underneath of that. That's going to say groups may be larger, maybe one larger. Or groups may include one additional participant. Then I want a button. The text of our button is going to be how many groups. And I want to name this button BTN how many. I'm going to scroll this up a little bit. Don't need this application to be quite that big as far as the form size. And there is our interface. I want to change the optimal group size here, the number to 4. And I don't think we named that, so let's make sure we name that text box. I'm going to call it txt optimal. Get rid of my properties panel, and let's double click the button to code it. Okay, we're working with integers here since we can't divide a person. So we're going to have an int of total, optimal, groups. I'm going to have a variable called +1. That's going to be our groups that have more than the optimal. And optimal groups. Okay, so our total, we're going to get the input from our user in those text boxes. So I'm going to do int.parse, and I want the value that's in txt participants, and I want the text property of that control. Add my semicolon, and then optimal, again, is going to equal int.parse. Here we want txt optimal. And again, I want the text property and my semicolon. So our total number of groups is going to equal our total divided by our optimal. And since those are both integers, total and optimal, that will give us an integer division, and groups will be the integer minus the remainder. But I need to know the remainder. So +1 equals total, and here I can use that modulus operator, the %sign, optimal, and that's going to give us the remainder. That's how many groups are going to have an additional person. And so then our optimal groups will equal groups minus +1. And now we simply need to output that. So I'm going to create a string called prompt. We're going to do some concatenation here. And we're going to say there will be plus groups. I need to convert that to a string. Plus total groups. That's going to be the first line. I'm going to build this in with a couple lines and do that over 3 statements. I could do it all in one, but I think sometimes it's easier to break things up a little bit, makes it a little more readable. So we're going to do prompt plus equals, we're going to concatenate to prompt. I want a new line character as well as a tab. So \n\t. I'm going to add to that our optimal groups, converting that to a string. And we'll say groups with, I want a space after that. And I'm going to concatenate to that the value of optimal plus 1 and convert that to a string. And so you can see this. I'm just going to bring this down the next line. Plus, and we'll add in the phrase people. And my semicolon. And I'm getting the squigglies here because I forgot to put my parentheses after toString. We're going to add our third line. Prompt plus equals. And again, I want to do a new line and a tab. Plus, this is going to be our +1 dot toString. Plus groups with, make sure I put a space in front of groups so it doesn't all run together. Plus, and again I'm going to go down to the next line. This is going to be our optimal. And I just realized I made a little mistake here because I've got the optimal groups plus the 1, and this plus 1 should be down here. This statement, paste that in there, and then I'm going to change this to optimal. I could get rid of those parentheses. I don't really need those, so we'll just do optimal.toString. And I want to use that in my message box then. So message box.show. I'll have my prompt, and my title will be number of groups. And I need my semicolon. All right, that should be it. I don't see any squigglies. Let's test this and see if it worked. So here's my project. I've got 18 and 4. How many groups? And I'm told I have 4 groups, 2 with 4 and 2 with 5. And that's what we did in that. That's what we showed in that animation. So that seems to be correct. But let's do our 225 and our 17. That was part of the original example. And we're told there will be 13 total groups, 9 of those with 17 people and 4 with 18 people. And that matches the output we had in the original instructions for this project. If we took 9 times 17 plus 4 times 18, that should give us 225. So that seems to work. We'll do another just really simple example. Let's say we have 5, we have 7 people and we want groups of 2. So we should then get 3 groups, and one of those groups would have 3 people in it. And that's exactly what we get. So everything seems to be working. That is our project in which we use some modulus and integer division and string concatenation.